Are you ready? Oh, yeah. Are you ready? I'm always ready. I saw you were with them last night. Alrighty, Aphrodite, we're going to cut this a little short. Engaging time will be coming to a place near you soon. I promise it's going to happen. We just have a lot of stuff on our plate, folks, so just bear with me. We're still writing. We just finished another song called Lord, You Blow Me Away, and my guitar teacher was quite impressed. I'm going to be presenting it to my my producer and my choir director at the church, and we'll see how it goes. My name is Bill Miksch. I'm president of WDMA Financial Group. This is your Insurance Corner at 101.5 FM, WLCB, Slades Corner, Wisconsin. Let me finish up with one last thing about health care, and then we're going to move on to taxes and how elections have consequences with regard to tax and insurance and health care, etc. A good thing that took place was this year, as of 2025, the federal government passed a law that said the max out-of-pocket for a person who is on Medicare cannot have more than $2,000 of out-of-pocket costs for their prescriptions. So for a lot of people that are on Medicare, they don't come anywhere near that. But there are a lot of people, folks, and I know them because they're clients of mine that have significant costs of prescriptions. I know one client of mine takes a prescription that costs $9,000 a month for MS. $9,000 a month. So somebody like her is impacted greatly by this. That's a good thing for her. But what did I say earlier? The insurance companies are not in the business of charity. And so what have we seen in the prescription world for calendar year 2025? There used to be 3 pages of quotes on Medicare.gov to review your prescription costs. And this specifically is for people that are on Medicare supplements, not Medicare Advantage plans, but they're still subject to the same rules. There used to be 3 pages. We're now down to 2. And then what did the insurance companies do? A lot of brokers, not me, a lot of brokers were getting compensation by selling certain prescription programs because the insurance companies would pay them a commission if they sold XYZ prescription program. That's great. Fast forward to now, most of the companies that are selling prescriptions are not paying brokers any commissions any longer. And I was reading one article where one broker was making about $20,000 a year just selling the prescriptions. That's not chump change, folks. That's real money. And the $20,000 is on top of everything else he does. But that particular item in his revenue chain now has been eviscerated by the stroke of a pen by either a bureaucrat or Congress as a result of putting this in there. Now, they didn't cause the insurance companies to not pay the commissions, but the insurance companies are going, we got to get the money from somewhere, so we'll take it away from the people that bring us the business. So brokers are not getting paid commission on those things. Then today I was listening to a seminar about Medicare Advantage plans. And there are 3 major companies in the Medicare Advantage space that will no longer be paying commissions on certain products in the Medicare Advantage portal. I've said this for a long time. Medicare is complicated. It can be confusing. I talked to a colleague of mine today who was on Medicare, and he went online and he didn't find any of his doctors. Now, fast forward, he was able to call the agent, and they figured out what the problem was, and they found the doctors he was looking for. But what if that agent is not available because they're not getting compensated any longer? What is the senior citizen supposed to do? Call the 800 number and hope for the best? It's like calling the IRS and asking one question and getting 20 different answers. So the prescriptions are going to be a big deal for a lot of people. The good news is the law addresses a problem which caps the out-of-pocket at $2,000. The bad news is the delivery systems, ergo the brokers or the insurance agents that sell these things, are no longer compensated. So it's problematic. All right. So we talked a little bit about healthcare. It's complicated. It's messy. Doesn't guarantee you anything. You do have access. Affordability is arguably questionable. And this is the last metaphor I'll use, and I've used this before. Imagine that you are a diver in the water, and the health insurance industry is a octopus with 100 legs. You have a very sharp knife, and you're able to sever 4 arms off of that octopus pretty quickly. What you didn't realize, whether you intuitively did or not, you kept swiping. He's got 96 arms that's still whacking you, and what you didn't know is those 4 arms that you just cut off, he can grow them back. That's the healthcare industry in a nutshell. Complex, lots of moving parts, lots of fingers in the jug, and a lot of rules to know that individuals need to know and employers need to know at different levels. It's hugely complicated. So elections are going to have consequences in the healthcare spot. And I don't think it doesn't matter who's in the White House. The other part, and we're going to get into taxes next, we're sitting on $36 trillion in debt. We have chaos going overseas. We don't have the money to be able to absorb more healthcare costs any longer. Something has to give. And as I said earlier, you want to fix this problem, everybody has to come to the table and say, what are they willing to give up? That's what's going to happen. And adjustments are going to have to be made. And the one last thing I'll say about this is this. I know some of the politicians have said we're not touching Medicare. They must have failed mathematics 101 or maybe hit their head on the sidewalk when they fell down. Because this is simple mathematics, folks. You don't have to have a degree from MIT or Harvard in math to understand that the system in both Medicare and Social Security, the current system, is going broke. You have to make an adjustment. That's a hard thing. Now, for people that are probably between 55 and 65, probably nothing's going to happen to those people, maybe even if you're 50. But for people under 50 years old, yeah, the rules are going to have to change. I hate to say that, but it's math. It's mathematics. We're not having as many people. We're not having as many babies anymore as we used to. The population is getting older. There's 12 to 14,000 people a day turning 65. A day turning 65. That means they're Medicare eligible and potentially Social Security eligible, depending on when their date of birth is. And if they're turning 65 now, most likely they're going to be able to get their full Social Security retirement at age 67 or 66 in a few months. Complicated, lots of moving parts, but to say that you're not going to touch it defies mathematical logic. All right, let's get into taxes. So what did I just say? We're $36 trillion in debt. That's the credit card, folks. That's what we know. What we don't know and what people don't absorb is the unfunded liabilities. We're talking $36 trillion. That's what we know we've overspent our government credit card on things that are worth it and things that are not. Pandemic certainly didn't help. The Affordable Care Act alone cost about $10 trillion of that. Between Trump, with the start of the pandemic, and then Biden in the middle of the pandemic, cost to sustain the average taxpayer while we fought through the pandemic was mind-numbing. Added trillions of dollars to the deficit. Now we're past the pandemic, and we're watching We're watching the government ask for more money, but what we don't see is cost cuts in their budgets. In the employer side, I'm sorry, let me say it this way. In the private sector, if you're bleeding cash or you're losing business, the first thing that's going to go is staff. I don't see anybody at the federal or state level getting terminated. They're just floating the dollars. I hate to say it, but the reality is, people are going to have to be let go at the federal and state level, at the government level. If they're not willing to make cuts that deep and they have to go 10 to 20% of the staff, and I'm sure there's enough fat to cut, then we're not serious about getting control of our budgets. And my kids, your kids, and the grandkids are going to suffer the consequence of the complete moronic idiocy that the people in Washington are creating. And by the way, those same people don't have the same skin in the game that you do. They get pension plans on your tax dollar. They get guaranteed health insurance on your tax dollar. And they don't have any skin in the game. None. Zero. Zip. But people that are elected make decisions, good, bad, or otherwise. I'm sure there are good people on both sides of the table that are trying to do the right thing. But this is an ugly business. And we're in a bad situation right now. So if we raise taxes, what does that do with our economy? And is the government going to be trusted to raise the tax to pay down the debt or do whatever they're supposed to do with that money? Or are they just going to spend like a drunken sailor and continue to do what they were doing before? My suspicion is based on history. They're just going to maintain the status quo. How do we know? They haven't passed a budget, folks, in at least 5 to 10 years. They've been managing this on what are called continuing resolutions. Just kick the can down the road. Just open up the checkbook, borrow some more money from God knows where it's coming from, or print it, and just make sure we can, pay our bills with monopoly money. It's not good. Social Security is going broke. You're going to have to make an adjustment. You cannot sustain what you're doing. It's not a political statement. This is math, simple mathematics. You cannot sustain what you're doing right now. The trustees of the Social Security Administration have said that if things don't get fixed by the year 2033, everybody who's getting Social Security benefits are going to see a 1/3 cut in their benefit. But I don't see the pension plans being cut by the people that made these decisions, that are living in retirement in luxury, whether they were a bureaucrat or a congressman. I don't see them getting punished. Let's talk about estate taxes and income taxes that are on the books right now but are about to expire. So some of the Trump tax cuts are about to expire at the end of the year. Elections have consequences. Depending on who gets elected in Congress, meaning the House and the Senate and the White House, will determine whether or not those tax cuts are going to go bye-bye or they're going to be revisited, sustained, continued, or amended, but continued. And it's lazy intellectual fodder, in my view, for politicians to say this is tax cuts for the rich. It's real easy to say that when it's factually untrue, when we know the tax cuts that did happen, by and large, affected pretty much everybody up and down the food chain. Did the rich get a benefit? Sure they did. But I hate to say this, but the rich are the ones creating the jobs, many of them, business owners. The business owners I know, folks, are not driving around in Learjets and private cars. They're blue-collar workers, just like the rest of us. They just happen to own the company, but they take all the risk. Let's talk about estate taxes. At the end of next year, If you're wealthy enough, if you've been fortunate enough to build wealth, right now you can pass about $13.5 million per person, about 27 million as a couple, if you do it right, estate tax free at the federal level. I'm not talking about the state level. I don't think, at least in Illinois has a $4 million estate tax, so you don't have to be wealthy in the multi-million-dollar space to have to end up paying an estate tax in Illinois. You're going to get hit with an estate tax if you have $4 million estate. But the federal level is 13.5 million roughly, and about 27 million for a couple if it's done correctly. At the end of next year, not this year, at the end of next year, that threshold is going to drop to about 6 million. Lots of those people have been planning for a 27 million or a $13 million estate tax problem. Fast forward to now, they're now looking at a potential estate tax where they can only pass 12 or 13 million as a couple. That means there's another $13 million potentially, or 6 million, that are at risk. And the estate tax is roughly half. Roughly half. Where's that money coming from? Some people would say, well, they're wealthy, they should have they should have that handled. I hate to tell you, folks, that's not how it works in the real world. Lots of business owners get to that point, and they'll get to it when they feel like it, and then they don't. The really good example that I want to give here, this is back in the day, for those of you who remember the Joe Robbie Stadium. Joe Robbie owned the Miami Dolphins. It's no longer the Joe Robbie Stadium because Joe Robbie died without a will, and he was very wealthy. I'm sure he had a lot of people around him who were very smart, good advisors saying, hey, Mr. Robbie, you got to get your stuff together. Never happened. Never happened. The family ended up having to liquidate probably a boatload of stuff in order to pay the estate tax, and one of them was to get rid of the Miami Dolphins. Truth. Now, he is a multimillionaire. What if you're just, you have, I'm going to keep it real simple. You rent everything. You don't own anything except for a $5 million life insurance policy. That's what you have in your estate, and you own it. You're worth $5 million. In the state of Illinois, you're going to pay a state tax on $1 million. Where's that money coming from? That $5 million was there to sustain your family. True. Was there to sustain your family. Not going to happen. State of Illinois is going to grab some of that money. So taxes and elections have consequences. And very smart people, well-to-do people, very, well-intentioned people get elected. Some of them probably shouldn't be. Some are. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But until they can start talking to each other like human beings, instead of dropping all kinds of names and hyperboles and fallacious name-calling and whatever, because they want to have their 15 seconds of Andy Warhol fame, sadly, I don't think we're going to be able to move the ball. Now, I don't know what happens behind closed doors. Maybe they're more adult-like. But when you see these talking heads go on TV, it's like they can't even agree what color the wall is. It's honestly pathetic. And it's disheartening. It's disheartening. Elections do have consequences when it comes to your tax, when it comes to your insurance, when it comes to your estate. They all have consequences. One side wants to reduce taxes, which is great, but they don't stop the spending. The other side wants more taxes, and it wants to increase the spending. It's a terrible way of doing business, and there's not a single employer in the private sector that could work that way. They'd be bankrupt. And I'll say this last thing as we're coming up to the top of the hour. I've heard congressmen suggest that they are like boards of directors. I wonder whether or not we could sue the boards of directors for mismanagement of the government corporation. I don't care if they were only elected one time, they were part of the process. I wonder if we could sue the bureaucrats. Now, the truth is, probably can't. Truth is, there's probably laws that they passed that baked in that said, you can't sue me if something happens. But I wonder if that ought to be looked at. And I think the last thing that I want to say about this is that both sides lie on a consistent basis. So you never know who's telling the truth, and the media doesn't help. The media is nothing more than the fourth arm of the government. Depending on what station you listen to, you get one side or the other of the story. At least they're not calling people names. They leave that to the politicians. But the truth is, well, that's probably not true either. Some of the talking heads that are talk shows, they do have name-calling situations. But I wonder whether or not we ought to change the law that if you do actually say something that's false, there's a law in the books from the Supreme Court called New York Times versus Sullivan. And the essence of that law says this: if you're a private person and somebody defames you, you can sue them for libel or defamation of character. But if you are a famous person, you have to prove what's called malicious intent. You intended and maliciously intended, which is legal psychobabble, maliciously intended to attack your opponent. You have to prove that. I think that part of the law needs to be squashed. And I think that part of the law ought to look like this. If you say something that's false, or you use malicious terms, and it's done in a malicious way, and it's done to denigrate your opponent, but it brings no value because it is not true on its face, then maybe that politician, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, you should be sued for defamation or libel and held accountable for your actions. And maybe that'll stop the hyperbole that goes on not only by the politicians on both sides of the aisle, but our media who helps them proliferate that. Just saying. Elections and taxes. Elections and healthcare. Elections and insurance. They all have consequences. We as the voter have a right every 2 years to vote. Unfortunately, some of us just vote because they have an R or a D next to the name. I don't like him because he did this. I don't like him because he did that. Well, you're not hiring a friend. You're hiring a manager or a CEO of a company. You want to make sure that they're competent, that they're qualified, that they deserve to be there. You wouldn't just hire somebody off the street. If you needed a technical person to run your operation, you wouldn't hire Johnny Lunchbucket. You certainly wouldn't hire me to run your electrical lines. I'd electrocute the whole freaking building if I did that, if somebody did that. You want to hire competent people. And it just defies logic that we allow our system to do this. Sad. We can fix it, but we'd have to show some courage, and we have to show some moxie, and we're going to have to make very difficult decisions, and for those decisions, those politicians may be out of a job tomorrow because of their decision. That's the way it goes. With that said, we are at the top of the hour. My name is Bill Miksch, president of WDMA Financial Group. Next week, we're going to get back with retirement and annuities and healthcare and all that. You have a great night, everybody. The polls are closing, at least in the central states and the East Coast, so we're going to start seeing numbers here soon. You have a great night. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.